Hey everyone, in McMaster Health Sciences application, you can choose two options in their first question between A and B. Here's where we're going to focus on B. So we're going to try to help you give guidelines and structure around this question. How do I best answer the Raven Song question? That's what we're calling this question 1B. And if you aren't familiar with this question, here it is. In her 1993 novel Raven Song, author, poet, educator, and member of the Stolo Nation, Lee Miracle, wrote, "Where do you begin telling someone that their world is not the only one? What is your interpretation of this line?" That's the key question there. Let's review the checklist that we have introduced in prior modules, which allows you to self-evaluate the efficacy and the quality of your response, as how the admissions committee and the supplementary application reviewers will do the same. This isn't the exact formula that they use, but it's a really good structure for you to understand the quality of your own response. So how you approach this question will really determine the uniqueness of your answer. And looking at the checklist, uniqueness and creativity is a really important part of your question. So we want to stand out. So if you're approaching this by researching Raven Song, maybe ordering a copy of the book on Amazon and reading the whole thing and researching the author, I wouldn't suggest doing that approach alone. I would suggest doing a little bit of research on the author, maybe on the Stolo Nation, maybe on Lee Miracle, but you use that context and information to then develop your own beliefs and incorporate your own life experiences. And as you can see from this visual example, the people who really just focus on the Raven Song or the Stolo Nation are going to be the ones that don't really stand out. It's those that incorporate their own beliefs, their opinion, and their life experiences into this response who are going to actually really stand out. So first, let's actually go through a little bit of context on Raven Song. So it's about the gulf between two cultures. There's this urban native community that's devastated by an influenza epidemic, which is kind of interesting as to what's happening in our world right now. The main character is named Stacy. She's 17 years old. She's a native girl, and she's struggling with the clash between white society values and her own family's traditional ways. She comes from an indigenous community. And this is really a story about a woman's quest for answers and this gulf, this separation and divide, and her challenges and struggles and quest for answers of going through that divide and seeing that in her community and the people who she's dealing with on a daily basis. Now, after doing a little bit more research myself on the book, I didn't order the book, I didn't read it, but this is a little bit of research that popped up. So first of all, one of the insights that I gained was this importance of gaps in linguistic meaning. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. So I'm just going to read through this blurb that I found in a paper that was written on the book. So it says the flu means illness to them. So to white people, or to the people in the community, for non-Indigenous people. For us, for Indigenous, it means terror. That's a line out of the book. Their realization of this potential gap in meaning reinforces for them the importance of not taking the words as they find them, but making them their own. This is important. Consciousness finds itself inevitably facing the necessity of having to choose a language. Don't lose me here. It's a bit of a confusing statement, but let's unpack this. Consciousness finds itself inevitably facing the necessity of having to choose a language. You, as a conscious person, have to choose a language. Sometimes there are words or phrases like flu that actually means multiple different things, and you have to consciously choose what your interpretation of that word is. With a with each literary verbal performance, consciousness must actively orient itself amid heteroglossia. Heteroglossia means that there are two or more viewpoints of the same word. So you need to orient yourself as a conscious person around the fact that one word, for example, flu, will have multiple different viewpoints for multiple different people. So Stacy has one view of flu, which is terror, whereas another person in the book from another background than Stacy, it just means sort of illness, something that they can get over quite easily. Another important aspect of this, another thing that I was underlining when I was going through some of the research, was this excerpt from this paper. But if only one uses language as it exists in the mouths of others, this is a really key phrase coming up, there's no ideological awareness. Ideological awareness is a really important phrase, and we'll unpack this very shortly. So I'm going to say this again, but if one only uses language as it exists in the mouths of others, so if you aren't interpreting language or words yourself, but you're only interpreting, or you're not interpreting it, you're just using that definition from someone else's mouth or from someone else's mind, there's no ideological awareness. You're not aware of your own ideologies. You're not aware of how you are using language, and how you use language depicts what you believe in or your ideologies. Only an unthinking conformity that supports a hegemonic view of the world. So basically, you are not thinking, you're conforming to a view of a hegemony. So hegemony is basically some powerful forces in the world that have created what the world is today. I kind of define that as colonization, and this is something that we'll talk a little bit more about as I try to break down this context of the book. But if you're only using language from other people, you are probably not thinking for yourself, and you're conforming to how other people around you have formed the world. So for instance, how Canada has been colonized, our language has been developed through that colonization, and we use language and communication and words, and we define and believe things based on that historical context. An option congenial to those who already belong in the dominant group, which is, Canadians, and Canadians took over the land from First Nations individuals, which are not the dominant group. Steve, this other character in the book, is the class intellectual, but he cannot engage in genuine dialogue with Stacy because he is unable to incorporate her separate reality into his utterances, into his language. Stacy asks, and this is where the line comes from, where do you begin to tell someone their world is not the only one? So it really comes from this character, this relationship that Stacy has with Steve. So Steve is a little bit self-absorbed. He has no idea about the gulf between him and Stacy. They have this conversation where it's about economic appropriation, but soon moves questions into, there's that word again, cultural hegemony. Steve explains how folding chairs, so these folding chairs that maybe they've just seen when they're walking around, those ones at events, he brought for this other character, were invented in Indonesia, but subsequently patented and sold by white men. And he launches into a discussion about other ideas someone had scooped up and patented and got rich from. So for Steve, who's part of a dominant culture, the chair is an example of how the economic system works. But for Stacy, it's a product, this whole chair is symbolic to colonialism. Stacy wondered how they managed to seamlessly or shamelessly steal the thinking of so many different people whom they called inferior. So it's very similar to what we were talking about earlier, that that hegemony. Steve is unable to see that, wait, this is probably a trigger for Stacy, because it actually is symbolic of what Europeans have done when they first colonized Canada to Stacy's nation. Steve's inability to move outside of his own perspective, so he's not able to see outside of his own perspective, is critical in this, and that's limiting him from being able to see and understand other worlds. So when she mentions this to Steve, it becomes apparent to her that although he's a class intellectual, and although he has vocabulary that implies awareness, he's not ideologically aware. His approval of economic appropriation betrays an unquestioning acceptance of the world as it is spoken by his culture, and an unwillingness to imagine what other meanings are possible. I don't know, he answered, curious. I never thought about it before. So he's not willing to imagine other meanings of that folding chair story. This surprised Stacy and made her wonder what else he did not have to think about. How much of the information he owned in his mind inspired thoughts in him, how much just gets filled or filed in his mind without him ever actually thinking about it again. So it gets stored in his mind, and he's using this to create other thoughts and other ideas. How much of that is just stored and he's not actually thinking about it? He's not ideologically aware. Steve's inability to move outside of his own perspective is further illustrated in his questioning of why Stacy does not accept his advances. Now, this was an article that I found about ideological corruption versus ideological awareness in science. So it's interesting to relate this story to science, because as a future health sciences leader, whether you're going into research as a doctor, physiotherapy, whatever it is, it's interesting to bring these essays back to this field. So this article was talking about awareness of our biases, and that's essential in good science. So awareness, ideological awareness, is really important when we're exploring science. Here's an excerpt from this article. Ideological commitments and social and political values have always influenced scientific research. Such values can light the way for science or lead it into darkness. Science does not occur in a social vacuum, as it were. The research reflects priorities, assumptions, and blind spots of individual scientists and the broader cultures they participate in. A well-known example of this is when the tobacco industry funded scientific experts to conduct misleading research about cigarettes' role in lung cancer. What we fervently wish to be true, or what we enrich a corporation if it were true, should not shape scientific findings. This is why so much attention is spent ensuring the funding sources of this scientific research don't improperly influence the findings. That's a really important point. This ideological corruption in science, whether it's certain organizations or bodies funding a piece of research because they actually want the findings to be something in particular to then create their own ideological views, or this more impartial view of science so that we can find kind of quote answers that aren't partial towards any group in society. This is another article I found about this idea of decolonizing your mind. So this book is a lot about this Western mindset that, and this is a quote from the article, the Western mindset continues to be a primary source of domination. It might be difficult for you to even wrap your mind around this, but a lot of things that we, as Canadians who have lived in Canada for families who have lived in Canada for multiple generations start to develop ideologies that aren't necessarily the same as other individuals, maybe new Canadians or First Nations communities. So this point about decolonizing your mind is something to try to explore a little bit more. So that's some context on Raven Song. So now we're going to go through a suggested structure that that would be helpful for you in this question. The first thing, I want to summarize a few themes here that we took from the research of the book. On one end, there's this colonization of your mind, and on the other end, there's decolonization. So that's a way that you can start to really open up someone's mind to allow them to view a world that is not their own. So the decolonization point, on one side of the story, there's this self-absorbed theme that is Steve. And if you want to, if Steve were to be able to open up his mind, he would have to be a little bit more empathetic, maybe open. On one side of the coin, there's this unthinking conformity. On the other side of the coin, there's conscious inquiry. Or another word that we saw in there was ideological awareness. And then another point or theme we saw was unwillingness to see others' perspectives. And on the other side of that would be true openness to other people's points of view. Quick reminder of the answer first communication structure and approach. If you haven't already, watch the skills module about how to write in an answer first structure. Highly recommend it. It starts with answering the question directly, then providing a reason for your answer, supporting arguments. And this is how we structure each of these STEM essays. This is the recommended template framework for this essay. So what we suggest is using this as a structure so that you're not just starting with a blank page. And we'll provide in the description a template that you can use. You can literally go into the Google Doc, go file, make a copy, save it in your own Google Drive, and start adding bullet points to help answer and structure your own individual response to this question. The format that we're suggesting is 4 paragraphs. The first being answer. So this is where you summarize your interpretation of this line. Now note the question that they're asking isn't this. It's not the line from Miracle. The question that they're asking is this. What's your interpretation? So in the first paragraph, I'd like you to, in the first 2 to 3 sentences, answer your interpretation. What is your interpretation of this line? What does it mean to you? You don't have to say literally, my interpretation of this line is ... You don't have to say that, and that won't really distinguish you. You can summarize your interpretation more uniquely to draw the reader in and demonstrate a more unique approach. Then you'll state strong reasons on why you believe your interpretation is valid and true. And we suggest around 400 characters for this. We suggest 250, approximately 250 for this. These are all approximations. Then after that is supporting arguments. So support further your reason with 550 characters. This is where I want you to bring in that personal insight, maybe your own personal examples or observations or experiences of the world to strengthen your case and connect your reasoning with your answer. And then I'd like you to tie it back a little bit. I'd like you to restate how your arguments support your interpretation, explain why this textual interpretation is important or brings value in relation to yourself or the rest of society. I would like you to tie it back to the issue that we see today with the relations with First Nations peoples in Canada. I would like you to tie it back in some way to your future as a leader in science and health science. And I would like you to just wrap this up in around 200 characters, so don't devote too much space to this. But it's a nice conclusion. Here are some thought starters to help you out. So the question, and actually if you're familiar with a gentleman named Peter Thiel, he's one of the founders of a company called PayPal. And a question that he asks in every one of his interviews is, what do you believe that others do not believe? And I think this question is a good opportunity for you to reflect on what your response would be and potentially incorporate that into your answer for this question. And the way that I've broken this down is, what are worlds? Well, worlds or how do you, going back to the actual question, where do you begin to tell someone their world is not the only one? Well, what is a world? A world isn't necessarily a physical earth. It's a system of things. And if I were to think about different systems of things, yes, it could be physical. It could be like a place, maybe your community, a town, a city, a country, Earth, our solar system. It could be something that's actually physical. It could be technological. A system of things could be something that's experienced in the technological world. It could be political. So your ideologies politically is kind of a system of things or a world. So, and we're seeing this in this moment in the US with Republicans, Democrats, this sort of divide and an unwillingness for each individual sometimes to be open to each other's perspectives. Social and cultural systems of things. Just think about all the different societies and cultures that exist around the world. Psychological. So some people have different personality types. There are certain personality types that shape how someone views a world. For instance, if you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, if you've done that in your grade 10 career class, you know that there are so many different personality types. There are so many psychographic profiles of people that shape how they see the world. And that could be a definition of a world in itself. Religion or philosophical systems of things or beliefs or ideologies. Physiological, linguistic, so language, and we kind of touched on that when we were going through some of the context of Ravensong and that whole point about a word can mean many different things to many different people. Or if you're learning a language, like in Chinese, it enables you to communicate a specific way that a Latin-based language might not. For instance, in French, different items around the house are actually have genders. And that's why you have to memorize these verb conjugations and things. Whereas in Mandarin, there's none of that. There's no male or female indication to different items. They're just an item. So that's the linguistic way of thinking about a world. There's different ethical views or systems of things. So choose one, use this list. There's many others, and I'd like you to get creative with this, because if you're watching this video, other people are going to be watching this video, and the whole point of these videos is to prompt your own unique thoughts, okay, and help you actually get skills to break down these questions. I don't think that it's helpful for a school to just give these super vague questions and let students unpack them themselves. As a 16, 17-year-old, you need some guidance to help build your skills to then take those skills to other questions that you'll receive throughout life, so that you can continue to unpack them in a way that's helpful for you. So choose one of these systems of things, create one on your own. This indicates kind of your own unique or individual belief on these systems of things. And what do other people, so the green indicates other people, what do other people believe the opposite of? And that's just something to perhaps prompt yourself as a thought starter in this essay. And then the other thought starter is why? Why don't others believe certain things? Why can't you open people's minds up to a world that isn't their own, a system of things that isn't their own? And here's a list of a few reasons that I came up with alongside our consultant who we speak to on a lot of these more kind of philosophical questions, who's a psychotherapist, that allows us to really tap into that side of analyzing these questions. So one reason could be shame. I don't believe in certain things because I'm afraid I won't understand it. Maybe I don't believe I'm competent, and if someone comes to me with a belief that is not my own, maybe I'm afraid, oh, it's too complex, and I'm avoiding opening myself up to believing that because I will feel a sense of shame if I'm unable to understand it. The other reason could be anger. Maybe I would be angry if you were to convince me of something that I don't believe. If you were to convince me that it's true, maybe I would be angry at the fact that it's true. So I'm going to shut you down so I don't have to meet that emotion. Maybe I'm fearful. So if what you are trying to convince me of or opening my mind up to is true, that would be really scary for me. So I'm not going to open myself up to that because I want to avoid a negative emotion called fear. Another negative emotion I would avoid by shutting down openness would be guilt. So, for example, if this were true, that would make me and my beliefs wrong. For instance, religion. If you were trying to open me up to if I'm a religious person and someone is trying to say, your religion is wrong, maybe God doesn't exist or whatever, I would feel guilty that if it was true, I'm gonna close myself out to what you're saying, because if it was true, then that would make my beliefs wrong or maybe no longer relevant. Control is another thing. If everyone is familiar with a gentleman named Jordan Peterson, there was an issue at his school where he chose not to actually use different terms that individuals would request of him who were non-binary. So there was a non-binary or multiple non-binary students who requested him to call them by like a her or she or whatever, and he wouldn't abide by that. And the reason why he wasn't open to that may have been because of a lack of control. If he let himself be open to that, if he accepts this to be true, then that is making him have less control on things, and rather he wants to impose his view on the world and of others and control more of the world with his own view. So that's just an example of my interpretation of control, and possibly an example that might relate to that. Another one is apathy. So I don't want to have to work or change or adapt. So I'm going to shut down openness because I just don't want to have to change or adapt to something that might be true. So these are examples of why others might not be open to believing in certain things that they currently do not believe. So here's an example that we developed. So for each of these module breakdowns, we provide 2 examples. This is the first one, and another one will be coming up very shortly. And this is exclusively for bootcamp students. So thank you for being a member and being a part of this. Hopefully this will be a really good reference for you. We're going to go through this based on, so this example has been exactly written using the template. Typically what I like to do is develop essays. When I'm doing these essays from scratch, we just go bullet point by bullet point and then end up just deleting all the bullet points, and then it turns into an essay. In the first paragraph, this reads, so the first paragraph is this answer of my interpretation of the line. And it says, there's a theory that humans are living in a computer simulation. I believe this theory acts as a unique and useful proxy for us to explore Merkel's line, since it's quite literally like telling people their world is not the only one. So that's the answer up front, my interpretation, concise reason. So let's expand on that. If you Google simulation theory, Elon Musk is the suggested add-on. The theory originally originated from a 2003 paper by a British philosopher named Nick Bostrom, but it only started to earn a massive cross-disciplinary following through Musk nearly a decade later. Suddenly, millions of people began to believe they were living in a simulation. So what did Musk do that Bostrom didn't? The answer is trust. So that's the reason behind my interpretation of this line. Trust is, so now we go into supporting our arguments. Trust is everything. It's the reason why you read one's friend's book recommendations and not the other, or why you avoid the, quote, seedy part of town. Trust also completely controls our triggers. The simulation argument, for instance, triggers people in different ways. For some, it causes fear. For me, it causes intrigue. Musk cultivates intrigue with me because I trust Musk. He's familiar and has a proven track record. So much so that I, brackets, and millions others were open enough to believe their world was not the only one, or is not the only one. And then I tie it back. So Merkel's line in the book is a prompt for Canadians to question beliefs that we wouldn't normally put into question. A similar prompt by the simulation theory. Sometimes it takes a trusted, familiar person, whether that's Lee Merkel or Gord Downie, to bridge that gap and create openness for that inquiry. So that's the example, and you can refer to that in a Google Doc in the video description. So how do we do? If I were to self-evaluate that essay, it's pretty good, I would say. Now, remember, you need some 6s and 7s on these essays if you really want to have a shot. And if I look at the different evaluation areas, the creative, unique, and different response, I would say that's a 4. I think that's a really creative response. Now, to what degree does your response give the reader an insight into who you are, strengths, values, passions, personality traits, life experiences? Didn't really go into a lot of detail on that. And that's an area of improvement for this essay, for sure. I gave myself 2.5 on that. So a little bit lower. To what degree have you asked why or so what in your main thesis? I spent a lot of time analyzing this. Spent quite a few hours actually thinking deeply about this question and about how it related to this more modern kind of take on our world not really being the only one. So I would say it's a 4. And then the logical structure, answered first communication method, it's very well structured. So I would give it 2 out of 2. So you sum up all these marks, you divide it by 2, and you get your typical answer. And this should say score instead of fit, but this would be your estimated score on the answer. And this is what we'll do as well when we go through these responses with you. If you're an essential a package member, or if you're a premium client, we'll literally go through this evaluation criteria with the essays that we develop. Sorry, not that we develop, that we help you develop and that we coach you on. So just a reminder, if you want to sign up for our essential package or our premium package, We do have limited spots available. We still have a small handful. I'm trying to train and find some more coaches that are really high quality. We only hire the best coaches who are familiar with McMaster Health Sciences, formerly went to McMaster, very familiar with the supplementary application process. I spend hours and hours training these coaches, and they have experience with the supplementary applications, either as a reviewer or experience in the past coaching students and with successful results. So we only have 2 right now. So if you want to sign up, please reach out. You can buy the essential package just on the sidebar. You can click that buy button and buy it right away, and we'll match you up with one of our coaches. Or if you're interested in the premium package and want that unlimited support, then contact us on the sidebar as well. Book a meeting, and we'll chat a little bit further about what that entails. So hopefully this was helpful for you, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.